we're aiming for here is not a ceasefire. What we ultimately are aiming for is an end to this war.
Well, I want to drill down on that exactly and what happened, because as you just heard before the meeting with President Putin, President Trump warned there would be, quote, very severe consequences for Russia if it didn't stop the war. Here's a little bit more of what he said on the plane ride over. Take a look.
And shout out to my man Vlad Steen. He says, if this continues, Ukraine will go extinct. I mean, S.E.T, and I'm not sure what that means, but I mean, I'm pretty sure I agree with you on it. Come on, Vlad, I'm old. I can't understand all this text language. But shout out to my man Vlad Steen. And you know what? I have the same opinion. I mean, like, bro, there'll barely be a country at that point. And there probably will be almost completely taken over by Russia. And you know who they're going to blame? They're going to blame Trump for either backing out or not being hard enough on Putin. And I mean, I think the whole world is going to try to shift blame towards Trump. Damn, they're going to ruin his Nobel Peace Prize opportunity. And it just is what it is.
I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's.
Oh, and shout out to my man Seth. He sent in $2. He ain't had too much to say. Just wanted to show some support. Appreciate that, my man.
Not today.
So what exactly changed? Is it that Putin would not agree to?
Sure, you could type it in now, bro. I'll catch it.
A ceasefire.
Well, first of all, the Russians are already facing very severe consequences. There's not a single sanction that's been lifted. And not one. I mean, they're facing all the same sanctions that have been in place today. All the American support continues for Ukraine. And ultimately, look, if we're not going to be able to reach an agreement here at any point, then there are going to be consequences. Not only the consequences of the war continuing, but the consequences of all those sanctions continuing and potentially new sanctions on top of it as well. But but
here's the thing, though. We're like, that's a crazy bet. That's a crazy bet right now. And I mean, we literally be forced to betting on the not Ukrainian, but the Russian economy crumbling before they could finish the war and, you know, stop ending the lives of like hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men. I mean, that's what they're betting on right now. We're going like, well, if we put enough economic pressure, maybe their economy will collapse and it'll work out for us. Or we might just put their Putin's back against the wall and the man does something crazy. Like, I don't know, maybe like drop a nuke. Like maybe we should just come to a peace deal and take our losses with this, guys. Maybe we should.
Trying to do right now is end the war. And in order to end the war, you've got to give every opportunity that exists. You have to be open to any opportunity that exists to bring it about. And here's the thing to remind everybody. And when the president says this is not our war, but let's be frank, this is not our war. The United States is not in a war. Ukraine is in a war, and we've been supporting Ukraine. We happen to be in the role of the only country in the world, with the only leader in the world, that can actually bring Putin to a table to even discuss these things.
Yeah.
Now, the president has traveled.
Because nobody else is a superpower, and Putin only respects power. So, of course, he's only going to meet up with the guys who got power. I mean, he's only going to meet up with Xi and Trump. If Xi and Trump ain't on the line, Putin don't got to answer, in most likely in his mindset. Why? Because who else can stop him? Who else can cause economic hardship on them? But the United States and China and maybe India, due to the high number of oil barrels they buy.
Well, all the way to Alaska, all the way back, has dedicated months and months of work, our entire team on this matter, because we want to see an end to the war. But if tomorrow the war continues, life in America will not be fundamentally altered. So I think that what we have to understand is that this has been a priority for this president because he wants to promote peace. He wants to promote the end of a war. And I think we should be happy that we have a president that's trying to promote peace and bring a war to an end.
Mr. Secretary, let's look at the state of the war. It's really captured in this chart. I want to put it up on the screen for our viewers. It shows that Russian attacks on Ukraine have nearly doubled since President Trump came into office. And in fact, in July, Russia launched more than 6,000 missiles and drones. That's the highest amount of attacks since the war began. What do you say to Ukrainians who worry that without a ceasefire in place, you are giving Putin more leverage at the negotiating table and a green light to drop more bombs?
Well, the problem with that is that we've been asking for a ceasefire for a long period of time. We think usually it's very hard to negotiate when you're in the middle of hostilities. But that said, the only way to have a ceasefire is for both sides to agree to stop firing at one another. Beyond that, and the Russians just haven't agreed to that. Beyond that, I would say that one of the complications about ceasefires is they have to be maintained, which is very difficult. I mean,
Yeah, maintain on all fronts of the battlefield, which I believe they tried the first time, and there were just still parts of the battlefield that were popping off. I mean, generals just did not want to quit. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, sad reality of that. And shout out to my man Vlad Steen. He says, "Oh, Cool Bean is just a troll. Read his post. I'm done." I mean, shout out, I'm weak as I read Cool Bean's thing right here. As thanks for supporting my man Set. You know what, babe? Let's go ahead and get this call in line so we can have y'all in here, because this is absolutely like hilarious to me. And the reason why it's hilarious to me is because honestly, I think you two should have this talk, debate it out, and I'm pretty sure y'all will come to some common ground somewhere. You know, Cool Bean is not as salacious in voice than he is in text. For some strange reason, Cool Bean, for some strange reason, you are way nicer on you know, over voice.
Every single day, we keep an eye on what's happening between Pakistan and India, what's happening between Cambodia and Thailand. Ceasefires can fall apart very quickly, especially after a 3.5-year war like what we're facing now. But I don't think anyone disagrees that the ideal here, what we're aiming for, is not some permanent ceasefire. What we're aiming for here is a peace deal. So there's not a war now, and there's not a war in the future.
But why not impose more sanctions on them and force them to agree to a ceasefire instead of accepting that Putin won't agree to one?
Well, first, I think that's something that a lot of people go around saying that I don't necessarily think is true. I don't think new sanctions on Russia are going to force them to accept the ceasefire. They're already under.
I know, right? They're already under crazy sanctions already. I mean, they're already buying oil in Chinese yuan already. They're already establishing something outside of the US dollar already. It's called BRICS. So I don't even agree with us using our dollar as I don't even like the fact that we use sanctions. I think that using our dollar as a weapon or weaponizing our dollar creates distrust in our dollar, and it ruins our economic leverage that we have, because people are going to start looking for other options if they can't trust us to not use our dollar as a weapon to subjugate them or to make them capitulate to our demands.
They're very severe sanctions. I think that it should be. You could argue that could be a consequence of refusing to agree to a ceasefire or the end of hostilities. But there is no evidence that more sanctions, because sanctions take months and sometimes years to bite. And we may very well wind up in that place. I hope not, because that means that peace talks failed. But we have to give every opportunity for peace a chance in this particular case. And that's what we're trying to do here. And so those options remain to the president. The minute he takes those steps, all talk stop. The minute we take those steps, there is no one left in the world to go talk to the Russians and try to get them to the table to reach a peace agreement. So that moment may come. I hope not, because I hope we get a peace deal.
But so, Mr. Secretary, a lot of people have heard President Trump threaten sanctions for months, and they are wondering, are they empty threats? Why hasn't he punished Putin to date for this?
Shout out to my man Daniel Castro. Sorry, my bad. I said Vlastine, didn't I? But Castro, Cool Bean is just a troll. I mean, let's be real. Cool Bean do be trolling his ass off.
War since taking office.
Well, again, every single sanction that was in place on the day he took over remained. And the impact of all those sanctions remain. You know, when the Russians landed in Alaska, they were there to refuel. They had to offer to pay in cash to refuel their airplanes because they can't use our banking system. They face consequences every single day. But the bottom line is that has not altered the direction of this war. That doesn't mean those sanctions are inappropriate. It means it hasn't altered the outcome of it. And here's what we do think is important, and that is that we end this war.
Here's the thing: we could try to cripple their economy, try to make it crumble. It's already damn near standing on its last legs. But will that stop the war, or will that make them go even harder? Is the question. And I think like a lot of people are just one-sided about it, but no, make them stop. We just crush their economy and add economic pressure. I mean, here's the thing: like, how much more economic pressure can we do? Because let's be real, I think we done used up our sanctions. Like they're already operating damn near outside of the US dollar already. Like, well, what else can we do?
This war, you have to be able to engage with the Russians. As much as people may not like it, as distasteful as people may find it, the only way to end this war is to get the Russians to agree, as well as the Ukrainians, but the Russians to agree to a peace deal. And the minute you issue new sanctions, your ability to get them to the table, our ability to get them to the table, will be severely diminished. That moment may arrive. But when it comes, what you're basically signaling is there is no opportunity for peace at this point. So just let's put on more sanctions and allow more people to get bombed and more people to be killed. And that's what we're trying to stop.
So, Mr. Secretary, what will Russia have to give up? What concessions will Russia, the aggressor, have to make as a part of this peace agreement?
Well, that's what these negotiations are about. And as you can imagine, everybody goes into a negotiation wanting 100% of what they want. That includes Ukraine, but obviously the Russians. And the only way to reach a deal on anything, whether it's in business or in politics or in geopolitics, the only way to reach a deal is for each side to get something and each side to give something. And that's been very difficult. If it was easy, this wouldn't have been going on for 3.5 years. Understand the law.
Yeah, the problem is that Russia gets everything and Ukraine gets nothing. I mean, what does Ukraine get? What, to stay alive, to maintain a country, while Russia gets land and I mean, I guess the glory of it. I'm not really sure. Like, what does Ukraine honestly get? I mean, if we can get Ukraine security guarantees, great, and they can see some land, all right. I mean, that's acceptable. But you're telling me that they can see land, no security guarantees, they don't get to be in EU or NATO, and they got to demilitarized. Oh yeah, I mean, that's gonna be a tough one to sell. I wonder how Trump or anybody's gonna sell that one.
The longer these wars go on, the harder they are to end, unfortunately, because one side is always looking for leverage on the other. In this particular case, the Russian side as well. And so I think that's the core of what we're trying to work through here. That's why Zelensky's coming tomorrow. That's why European leaders are coming tomorrow.
I mean, yeah, here's the thing. The only thing that we have for this man Putin is nothing that Ukraine is offering us, because due to their poor performance on the battlefield, we're not really working with too much cards on that end. But we do have the trade card, the tariff card. We do also have, like, hey, look, man, you can stop this. We'll take some sanctions off. Some of y'all oligarchs get some of their money back. You can get back into the American economy, and then y'all can kind of turn yourselves out of this wartime economy. You guys can save yourselves instead of taking instead of taking Ukraine. Russia, why not do that? And they kind of just hit us with we take Ukraine.
Why the president called them from the airplane, spent 2 hours in the middle of the night talking to them. And that's why we've been engaged with them every step of the way, is we are trying to find what can we get to that both sides can agree on. And it's been difficult. This is a hard issue set, but we're dedicating a lot of time to it. And the president deserves credit for dedicating time to it.
And I understand that these negotiations are ongoing, but can you name one thing that President Trump is asking Russia to give up in order to get peace?
Well, I'm not going to disclose those things, because if we do, then you can imagine the negotiations could fall apart. These negotiations, look, I know everybody wants to know what's happening, and to a certain degree, that's important. But what's more important is that these negotiations work. And for us to run to the press, like you see these leaks sometimes that are completely inaccurate. And in many cases, sometimes you see leaks out there that undermine the negotiations.
Shout out to our man Vlastine. He says, nah, KFC and grape Kool-Aid is the best combo ever. God damn. KFC is not what it used to be, man. If you talk about 1990s KFC, sure. Today's KFC, don't eat that crap. Man, I swear to God, you're going to get cancer.
Okay, these
allegedly, supposedly, reportedly.
Negotiations, in order for them to be successful, require for us to allow both sides to agree to potential concessions or discuss potential concessions without it finding its way in the public sphere and creating all kinds of internal problems for one country or the other country. So here's the bottom line. We all know what the elements of such a deal. There has to be talk about what the territories are going to look like and what the border lines are going to look like at the end of this conflict. There has to be talk about Ukraine's legitimate desire for security in the long term, to make sure they don't get invaded again. There has to be talk about how Ukraine is rebuilt, and how do you rebuild a country that's been attacked as often as it has over the last 3.5 years. These are all key elements of any agreement. We understand that. And each side is, if there's going to be a deal, each side is going to have to give up on something. That's just a fact.
Mr. Secretary, I want to show folks what Ukraine looks like right now. This is a map of Ukraine. That red section there, that's the area currently under control by Russia. It's about 20%.
All right, that's not too bad, because I done seen some maps that said, all right, here is all damn near taken by Russia as well. But this is not too bad. It's like 10%, 10, 15%, nothing too crazy. I've seen worse. So if you guys can give this up, demilitarize, promise to never join NATO or anything like that, no security promises from the US, we can get to a peace deal, right? I'm pretty sure the Ukrainians are kind of looking at this like, bro, ain't no goddamn way. And I can understand that, but can you fight for a better, deal? Can you fight for one? I don't think so.
Entire country. There are reports that Putin is asking to keep all of this territory in a potential deal. Is that what's being discussed? Can you confirm that?
Well, I can confirm that he's given speeches in which he has said that repeatedly.
So
That
he's
he wants
asking for
these
that now in
territories
these
out-
private conversations?
Well, look, ultimately, if
And shout out to my man Vlad Steen. He says churches, leaves, I'm open to options. Churches, leaves, I'm open out. No, churches is way better. But Seth, send in your the chat that you meant to send in, because hopefully I didn't miss it.
that the Ukrainians are not willing to give that up, and no one's pushing Ukraine to give that up. And so I don't think that's what, if there's going to be a peace deal, it's not going to look like that. But he certainly is making demands. He's certainly asking for things that the Ukrainians and others are not willing to be supportive of, and that we're not going to push them to give. And the Ukrainians are asking for things that the Russians are not going to give up on. I know this sounds, I know everybody wants to have more detail, but we're trying to have a serious negotiation here and see if we can find any middle ground between two warring parties in a very difficult war where the Russians feel, as they always do, like they have momentum on their side, and the Ukrainians have been incredibly brave in fighting back and in the defensive posture they've taken. The Ukrainians have inflicted a tremendous amount of damage on the Russians. I think last month alone, 20,000 Russian soldiers were killed in 1 month in this war. So the Ukrainians have inflicted tremendous amount of damage on the Russians as a result of this. Both sides are very dug in.
But the Russian army is bigger, though. I mean, let's be real. If we're talking about a battle of nutrition and they're just going to go man for man, eventually Ukraine is going to run out of people. Actually, they're already pulling old guys off the street, and they were already pulling young men off the street and putting them on the front lines. Now they're signing old men up. So you could tell that Russia still got reserves. I mean, they've lost over 1 million people and they still got 1.5 million in reserves. Now, Ukraine, about 450,000? They don't got that much people left. I mean, especially think about it like this: Russia, 140 million people. Ukraine, about 36, 37 million people. Like, do you not see where the whole, honestly, things are depending on the manpower of it. How many people do Ukraine have fighting for them versus how many people do Russia have? And since Russia has pretty much, what we're seeing is twice the number, they can afford to lose way more soldiers than Ukraine and still come out on top on terms of manpower.
This is a difficult one, but we're going to continue to work on it because the president's made it a priority to try to end the war that should have never happened.
Mr. Secretary, you were one of the few people in that room with President Putin and President Trump. You got to look him in the eyes. Do you believe that President Putin believes in Ukraine's right to exist based on what you heard and saw?
Well, look, I wasn't playing any of those games about looking people in the eye and trying to read their minds. I'm reading actions. And that's what we're looking at, is actions. What will you agree to? What will you commit to? And what will you follow up on? And in order for this war to end, Russia will have to take actions. Ukraine will have to take actions. Ukraine's partners and allies will have to take actions as well to enforce that peace in the long term. That's what we're interested in. Not all, I get all the drama around this stuff, but at the end of the day, we are talking about a war in which people are being killed and maimed every single day, in which a country has been dismembered by 20%, as you've just pointed out. And it's really important to bring this war to an end. This war doesn't get better. It gets worse as time goes on. It gets worse. It actually threatens to spill over into other areas. So it needs to be stopped. That's why the president's made it a priority. And that's what we're focused on. Concrete actions by both sides, especially the Russian side, to bring this conflict to an end. And we're going to do everything we can to make it happen. Is it possible? I don't know, but we're going to try. We've spent a lot of time on this issue. We have a lot of other issues to focus on, but the president's made this a priority, and he deserves credit for that.
Mr. Secretary, a couple more questions and we're almost out of time. NBC News is reporting this morning that NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine were discussed as a part of this agreement. Can you tell us what role would the United States play in such a security agreement?
Well, there'll have to be some security guarantees for Ukraine, right? I mean, it's one of their fundamental demands, is that if this war were to end, they have to make sure this never happens again. They don't want to get reinvaded. They don't want to wait 3 or 4 years from now and find another, war on their hands. So there's going to have to be some security guarantees as part of it. How that's structured, how that's built, what our role will be, that'll be the kinds of things we'll have to work through. But again,
I mean, due to what Russia wants, he wants them to demilitarize and have no security purposes. Now, I'm not saying that that's a guarantee that he's just never going to attack them, but I mean, it kind of gives a good point that he's like, as long as they don't join NATO, or the EU and they remain a neutral country, he has no beef with Ukraine. But as soon as they try to pick sides and y'all try to put some type of alliance on this man's border, he has a problem. Now, am I saying that, oh, this is the only reason why Putin invaded Ukraine? No, not at all. But we did give this man a reason, and that's one of them. I mean, we gave him at least 2 reasons why he should invade Ukraine. And it's because NATO was closing in on him or pushing, well, towards his border, which they already have with other countries. So I guess Ukraine was just that last straw. And NATO's obvious aggression towards Russia.
And that is going to be a key element of this deal. And it is something that in order for there to be a peace, the Russian side is going to have to accept that Ukraine is a sovereign country that has a right to defend itself and has a right to enter into alliances with other countries to defend itself. How that's constructed.
But if they're entering into an alliance causes a conflict that hurts their people, I mean, is that really a peaceful solution? Is that really something like, I would say this, like, can you call Zelensky a good leader if he knew with all common sense that, if I try to go into NATO, Putin's going to attack? Like, can you honestly call that a good leader, knowing damn well you would have to reach out to other people and you're going to lose a lot of soldiers? I mean, and you're fighting a superpower. Can we really call that good leadership, guys?
What we call it, how it's built, what guarantees are built in there that are enforceable. That's what we'll be talking about over the next few days with our partners who are coming in from overseas tomorrow for a series of meetings and in the days to come. We had a long phone call about this yesterday with several of the national security advisors from various countries in Europe.
Mr. Secretary, I want to play something you said about President Putin. This was right after the invasion in March of 2022. Take a look.
This guy lies, habitually lies. He's never kept a deal they've ever signed, and he lies all the time. And I don't know why, but he plays us like a violin in the West, because the West wants to believe that you can cut a deal with everybody. You can't cut a deal with guys like this. He's a professional, experienced liar.
I mean, yeah, he is a professional intelligence asset. So I would say this: it doesn't make him a liar all the time, but he definitely does know how to manipulate a conversation or get you to, I guess, feel like you're getting something done when you're really not. Like, Putin will show you a good time, knowing damn well he ain't gonna do none of what you said. And why in this situation? Why? Because, well, we have no power in the situation, and Putin knows damn well we're not gonna put boots over the ground or over Ukraine. If Putin knew we were gonna put boots on the ground over Ukraine, he knew this as a fact, this man would have came to the table and said, all right, I give. Like, America, don't get involved.
Mr. Secretary, given that, what makes you think that if you are able to reach a deal with President Putin, that he would stick to it based on, as you just said, he's a liar?
Well, that's the point. That's why the deal has to have enforceable mechanisms in it. That's why the deal has to have things like security guarantees. That's the point I was making a few minutes ago when you were asking me about looking someone in the eye. What's important here is actions, not words, not paper, document. Those are all important. Those are elements of a deal, but they have to be enforceable. They have to be verifiable. They have to be enduring. There's no point here in signing a deal that's going to be violated in 3 or 4 months. There's no point in doing that. It actually would make things worse. So that's why this is such a difficult thing. Not only do you need a deal, you need a deal that's verifiable, that's enforceable, and that's enduring. If you don't achieve that, then I think you could have a ceasefire for a few months, a few weeks, and then the war will start again and more people will die. That's not the outcome.
I mean, if we can ensure that Ukraine won't join NATO or the EU, then I would say I'm at least 70 to 60 to 70% sure that Russia's going to stay in their place.
Interested in. That's not the outcome anyone wants. So that's why this is so difficult.
All right. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, thank you so much for joining us after an historic week. We really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Yeah, I mean, sure was an historic week with that meeting. And Zelensky will be at the White House, well, today. All right, guys. Now let's get on to the right side of media and their grilling of Marco Rubio. Yeah, I know, right? They had the man out all day.
Now is the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was also on the trip to Alaska with President Trump and who will be there tomorrow with President Trump and Zelensky at the White House. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Why did President Trump's meeting with Putin end with no ceasefire? And what does Putin want?
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, if you recall, there's no way you can have a meeting like that. And we never said there was going to be a deal coming out of the meeting because the Ukrainians are not there. This is a war between two countries. It's not America. It's Ukraine and Russia. We met with the Russian side. We've spoken repeatedly with the Ukrainian side. We'll see them again tomorrow in person, along with our allies in Europe. So I do think some progress was made in that talk in terms of narrowing down the issues set. And now these are hard issues that remain. You know, the conversation about where the territorial lines are going to be, questions about long-term security guarantees and who Ukraine can have military alliances with, things like that. These are difficult things, but I do believe we made progress in narrowing down the issue set, but there's a lot of work that remains. There's still, there's a reason.
I mean, think about it. The negotiations are already settling around talking about Ukraine as if they're not a sovereign country that can, do their own thing. But the argument is, oh, they're a sovereign country. They should be able to do whatever they want. Well, if they could fight for it with little help, if they were able to fight back Russia, okay, cool. Yeah, great. Sovereign country. But if they can't fight back Russia and without us getting involved and kicking off World War III for them, then, I mean, sorry, but I guess you're not that sovereign of a nation. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to fight for that. Or you got to build your military for that. And, well, Russia don't want y'all to do that. And y'all right next to Russia. So, y'all, I'm sorry, but y'all in a bad position. Like figuratively and literally.
Why this war has been going on for 3.5 years. It's a war that never would have happened had President Trump been president, but he inherited it. And now he's trying to do everything he can to bring about peace. He's made peace a priority of his administration, as you've seen with all the peace deals we've been able to achieve throughout the world. This one's the hardest one. Everyone acknowledges that. But he's the only one in the world that has any chance of doing it. Look, peace may not be possible at the end of the day. We don't know. But if it is possible, he's the only one that can get it done. And that's why everyone's asking him. They're asking him to meet with Putin. And they're also asking him to come here tomorrow and meet with him to talk further about what we do next.
True.
A European diplomat has confirmed to Fox that President Trump supports Putin's proposal for Russia to take full control of Luhansk and Donetsk, all of Donbass. Do you support this move?
No, first of all, I don't know who told you that, but they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, the president has said that in terms of territories and stuff, these are things that Zelensky's going to have to decide on. These are things that the Ukrainian side is going to have to agree to. That's.
But the problem is Zelensky is a bit delusional about the situation or the position that he's in. So can we even trust Zelensky to make the right decision for his own people? Because he hasn't so far. I'll tell you that.
All the president is trying to do here is narrow down the open issues, narrow them down, and then see if we can play some role in bringing that closer together so we can stop and end this war once and for all. Look, this war is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
Damn.
You've seen that in the escalation and the attacks. Russia's economy is now 100% full-time war footing. They are producing munitions. The Ukrainians are as well.
True.
Both sides are hitting each other very, very hard. And
True.
the war is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
But who can do it for long? Like, who can go the longest in this war is the real question. It's an obvious answer. Who can go the longest in this war, Ukraine or Russia? Obvious answer would be Russia. There you go. They got more people. They got more weapons. They got more military tech. I mean, they can send in 700 drones. I mean, and they did it already. I mean, they're continuously doing it. So, I mean, obviously, Russia can go longer. I mean, even if their economy completely cripples, I think that would just force them to do a balls to the wall move, which I'm afraid of. I don't want their back against the wall too far because they might do something that's unforeseen. And like I said, drop a nuke. Here's the problem. If they drop a nuke, we still wouldn't put boots on the ground in Russia. Still, we just look at everybody like, oops, our bad.
So he's trying to do everything he can to bring it to an end. But people that are out there talking what they don't know with all these stupid leaks and things of that nature, they all want to just sound important. They don't know what they're talking about. The president's been very clear. He, in terms of like what Zelensky's going to agree to, that's up to them to decide. They're going to have to decide what they're willing to give and ultimately what they're going to get, what they're going to demand as well. Both sides are going to, but here's what I can tell you for certain. You can't have a peace deal between two warring factions unless both sides agree to give up something and both sides agree that the other side gets something, right? Otherwise, if one side gets everything they want, that's not a peace deal. It's called surrender. And I don't think this is a war that's going to end anytime soon on the basis of surrender. So this is tough stuff. I mean, it's difficult to bring these two sides together. We made some progress, we believe. And now we'll have to follow up on that progress. And ultimately, where this should lead is to a meeting between the three leaders, between Zelensky, Putin, and President Trump, where we could finalize it. But we got to get this thing closer before we get to that point.
What does Europe want, Secretary?
Well, look, I think
we already heard what Europe run. They want I mean, they didn't switch up. It went from NATO to EU for Ukraine being part of the EU, and they want Well, security guarantees for Ukraine. Ukraine being part of the EU, security guarantees for them. As Ursula said, she wants them to be a steel porcupine. A steel porcupine. So basically a no-touch zone. For Putin, of course.
Role that Europe can play ultimately in the long term is on security guarantees that Ukraine has been talking about. They should play a key element in that regard. And I also think that Europeans are very helpful being in the room sometimes and sort of giving ideas about, what accommodations can be made and what flexibility the Ukrainian side could have. So that's the role that they've played up to this point. The president invited them to come here. He told President Zelensky to come on Monday and bring European leaders that he chose to bring with him. So there's a handful of heads of state that will be here as well tomorrow at the invitation of the president to see if we can make some progress on some of these points. The president spoke to many of these leaders on the airplane. I think it was 2 o'clock in the morning our time. It was probably 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning their time on our way back from Alaska. And and then yesterday I had a call with all the national security advisors of the different countries. So we've got a work agenda ahead of us over the next few days, and we've been talking about these things now for a while as well. So because we also talked to them before. We have multiple meetings and conversations with them leading up to the events in Alaska. So they can play a very constructive role here. But ultimately, only President Trump, if a peace deal is possible, he's the only one that can bring it about.
Is Europe still buying Russian oil?
Well, if you look at the oil that's going to China and being refined, a lot of that is then being sold back into Europe. Europe's also buying natural gas still. Now, there are countries trying to wean themselves off of it. But there's more Europe can do with regards to their own sanctions. If they always talk about sanctions, and they've got a sanctions package coming out as well. But an additional sanctions package supposedly coming out soon. So, but for us, I think the most important role that Europe can play here is to have a constructive role in building up those security guarantees that will allow Ukraine the potential flexibility to make a deal on the rest of the issues that are at stake.
Well, I mean, wouldn't that be a major lever to pull to put sanctions on Europe or punish Europe for continuing to buy oil and gas from Russia? Is that something on the table?
Which is hilarious.
Well, I don't know about on Europe directly, obviously, but certainly there are implications.
I mean, can you imagine? I mean, they look, man, Europe rather buy oil from their enemy than buy oil from the United States, or their so-called ally. Y'all are hilarious sometimes.
Sanctions. If you put secondary sanctions on a country, let's say you were to go after the oil sales of Russian oil to China. Well, China just refines that oil. That oil is then sold into the global marketplace, and anyone who's buying that oil would be paying more for it, or if it doesn't exist, would have to find an alternative source for it. So we have heard, when you talk about the Senate bill that was being proposed, where there's 100% tariffs on China and India, we did hear from a number of European countries, not in press releases, but we heard from them some concern about what that could mean. But look, I don't want to get into a tit for tat with the Europeans on this. I think they can play a very constructive role here in helping us get to that point. But and the president has kept them in the loop. The first call the president made as soon as the meeting with Putin was over was to the Secretary General of NATO, Marco Rubio, who will be there tomorrow as well. We've been in touch with them over and over again with regards to this process. So I think the president's done an incredible job here of trying to bring the sides together. There's a lot of work that still remains. You don't have a deal, as the president says, until you have a deal. This is not an easy deal. This is not a war that began under President Trump. It's not, as you saw acknowledged at the press conference there in Alaska, it's actually a war that would not have happened had President Trump been in the White House. He inherits a 3-year-old war, and now he's trying to untangle it. And because if this falls apart, this thing's going to get far worse and go on.
And I do keep saying it's been so easy just to tell NATO to stay in their lane, tell Ukraine you're going to stay in neutral state. You're not going nowhere for your own safety. And then we tell Russia to look, and you guys better not invade Ukraine. It'd have been that easy. That's all we had to do was just pull NATO's coattails back, tell Ukraine to stay in their place, and tell Russia to back off. It was easy. It'd have been that easy, but none of it was done under the Biden administration. Actually, the opposite was done. Under the Biden administration, we told, Ukraine, come on over. NATO, F Russia. You're like, Ukraine, come on over. F what they talking about. We got you when we don't really got them. Look at the results.
On much longer. You have thousands and thousands of more people are going to die and be injured as a result of this.
Can you give us any clarity on a timeline in terms of the U.S.'s thinking? Obviously, there's no ceasefire in place right now. What are the repercussions? Are we just going to watch the murders continue?
No, look, at some point, a decision has to be made if peace deal is possible or not. If at some point it becomes clear that both sides are so far apart and so dug in that we're just not near a peace deal, then the president will have a decision to make about how much more time do we invest in it and what actions does he take then. But I want everyone to understand, if this morning the president woke up and said, I'm putting these terrible, strong sanctions on Russia, that's fine. It may make people feel good for a couple hours. But here's what you're basically saying. You're saying talks are over. For the foreseeable future, for the next year or year and a half, there's no more talks because there's no one else in the world that can talk to him. Okay, Putin's not going to meet with Macron. He's not going to meet with the UK. With all due respect to these leaders, none of these leaders are going to be able to bring him to the table and talk to them. There's only one leader in the world that has any chance of bringing these two sides together. If there is a chance, there's only one leader in the world that can do it, and that's President Trump. And you forfeit that role the minute you put additional sanctions on him. We may get to that point, unfortunately. But if we do, it means that peace talks are no longer possible. And that would be very unfortunate because the real world ramifications are that while we're here calling each other names and doing TV interviews about this stuff and all of that in American politics, there are people who today will be injured and killed in the battlefield and in cities, in Ukraine, on the front lines, and even in Russia. Even as we speak, people that have nothing to do with this war are suffering as a result of it. And I think we are very fortunate and blessed and should be thankful to have a president that has made peace and the achievement of peace a priority of his administration. We've seen it in Cambodia and Thailand. We've seen it in India, Pakistan. We've seen it in Rwanda and the DRC. And we're going to continue to pursue any opportunities we can find to bring about peace in the world.
Understood. What are you expecting to present to Zelensky tomorrow?
Well, I think tomorrow's conversations, a lot of it will be centered around what are the kinds of security guarantees that Ukraine is looking for. Because what Ukraine is looking for here is the war ends. How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? How do we make sure that in 2 or 3 years, the Russians don't come back at us? So they want guarantees built up so that they can protect.
I would say by remaining a neutral state and staying out of NATO and the EU and not trying to put a military alliance on Russia's border. I mean, that might just help you guys out. And I mean, if you need some assurities, I mean, they can always sign a treaty with either the United States saying that, oh, yeah, we won't go into Ukraine as long as Ukraine remains a neutral state and everybody's happy. Well, they should be.
Themselves or prevent such a war from occurring in the future. So the details of what that would look like is something that hopefully we'll spend a lot of time discussing tomorrow. We had a long conversation about it yesterday with the national security advisors of multiple European countries. Okay. Some work has already gone into it, but now we're at a stage where we need to build some details on it and then ultimately, obviously present that to the Russian side who and get them to accept it. But first we have to have our ducks in order.
Mm. What kind of security guarantees is the U.S. willing to make?
Well, that'll be part of the conversation tomorrow. At the end of the day, the truth of the matter is that any security guarantee that, the Europeans, there's a lot they can do and a lot they can offer. And it would be a huge concession. It would be a very big move by the president if he were to offer a U.S. commitment to a security guarantee. That'll be his decision to make. And I want people to understand that. That tells you how bad, if he does it, it tells you how badly he wants peace, how much he values peace, that he would be willing to make a concession like that. But ultimately,
and would Russia be willing to accept U.S. security guarantees? Like it, and I don't know. It kind of goes against the whole. Well, if he didn't want NATO, a military alliance on their border, what makes you think he want the U.S. military on his border? I mean, kind of seems like we're going back to the same position here.
That'll be a decision for the president to make. That's what we'll talk about tomorrow. I'm sure we'll spend 6-7 hours talking about these things, maybe more, and try to get to a point where we have something more concrete. We've done a lot of work on it already, but some more work is required before we can say that we have a plan on security guarantees that unifies us.
What other economic levers does the U.S. have to use here? I mean, you've got the secondary sanctions, and you said perhaps there is something to be done with China. What about designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, which is something Lindsey Graham has been working on?
Well, those designations can be useful from time to time, but in this particular case, they're not going to change the course of the war. Look, can the U.S. inflict greater pain on the Russian economy going after the banking sector, the oil companies, and things of this nature? Of course we could. Of course we can. And that always remains, unfortunately, an option. But just understand, if we get to the point where we're doing that, okay, it may make people feel good, and it may have an implication on Russia in the long term. But in the short term, what it means is that talks are over, that at this point, we are basically now stuck with another year and a half or two of war, of death, of destruction.
Yep, praying and hoping that that sanction actually did something to Russia that might swing it in Ukraine's favor, and most likely it won't. I know. So, guys, it's just gonna be one big fail if that's how it goes. Like, come on.
That's what it means. We may get to that point, sadly and unfortunately, because peace is not possible, but that we're trying to avoid getting to that point. We want to give every opportunity possible for the Russians to say yes to something that Ukraine can live with. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think the president deserves a lot of credit for wanting to do that. No one else has tried to do that. Joe Biden couldn't have done it. No other leader in the world could do it. Frankly, he doesn't have to do it. Look, the war in Ukraine gets a lot of attention, and I'm not saying it's an irrelevant thing. It's a very tragic thing that's going on.
It is.
But life in America on a daily basis will be largely unaffected whether there's peace in Ukraine or not. That's just a fact.
Yeah, like that BS with Ukraine when he said, well, when Zelensky came over here and said, you guys are protected by sea. I'm like, no, not really. I mean, Russia could easily come over here and attack that small island between Russia and Alaska, or just straight up attack Alaska, and that'd be that. So no, we're not really that protected from Russia, let's be honest. And also, Russia does not want no beef with the United States. That's the only reason why they even talk to us. And also, Russia don't even want beef with all of Europe. That's too much of a conquest that he just can't afford. He can barely afford to take on Ukraine. Putin can barely afford to take on Ukraine. What makes you think he's going to try for all of Europe?
We have a lot of issues we're focused on, not just at home, but around the world. But the fact that the president has dedicated this much time to a war between two countries on another continent tells you how much he values peace. And we should be very thankful and grateful that we have a president who's a president of peace, who values peace and wants to use the power of his office to achieve the end of wars and the prevention of new ones.
But isn't the U.S. directly impacted because of that rare earth minerals deal? How important is that deal? And has Putin already affected that deal by bombing the region?
Well, first of all, that deal is important, but I mean, the United States has other sources of rare earth minerals. I think that deal is very important for Ukraine and in terms of their own reconstruction and rebuild.
Okay, I see what Rubio is doing. Rubio is also adding his little own psychology in there as well. He's like, look, and what Rubio is doing is a message to Zelensky. He's pretty much saying, I'm like, dog, if you don't come to something, we will walk away and we will leave you with this and we will go on with our day and we will stop caring about Ukraine. American people will be just fine and we'll just stay out of it and we'll just continue to sell weapons towards it. I mean, hey, I'm okay with that. Now, the selling weapons towards it part, not so much, but it is what it is. But yeah, that's the play that Rubio is also pulling as well, of the threat of we will completely pull out and you guys will deal with Putin on y'all own without a superpower backing y'all. And I wonder how that's going to go for you guys. Not too well. I guarantee you that. It's a moment you don't want to deal with.
And to have American partners in a post-war Ukraine is of great benefit to the Ukrainian. Obviously, it would be great for us too. But I don't think that alone justifies, us being behind a war effort here. What we want to be able to do here is be behind a peace effort. We want to achieve the end of a war. So I'm not saying our interest in Ukraine are zero. What I am saying is the amount of time and energy that this administration has placed on this war is something that people should compare to some of the other issues we have around the world that deserve our attention as well. And the president just deserves a lot of credit for putting so much time and energy behind something that is very, very difficult to end. It's a very difficult war to end. The Russians feel very strongly that they have the upper hand, that they're making progress. They don't necessarily feel pressure, and the Ukrainians feel very strongly that they were invaded, that they've been aggrieved, and that what the Russians have done is horrifying and should be stopped. So both sides are pretty dug in. And, we don't have sanctions on Ukraine. We have sanctions on Russia. We don't provide weapons to Russia. We provide weapons and assistance to Ukraine. So the U.S. has done a lot already with regards to this. But this president is trying to figure out how to end it, how to stop it. And I think that's incredible that we have a president willing to use the power of the United States and the power. That's the goal here, is not to win the war. It's to end it.
So will you continue to put pressure on Russia in all ways in order to stop this? What is the next pressure point?
Well, in order to have a peace deal, both sides are going to have to make concessions. And so obviously, the Russian side is going to have to make concessions. One side cannot get everything they want. If in a negotiation, one side gets everything they want, that's not a peace deal. That's a surrender.
Yeah.
That's the terms of surrender. And I don't think you're going to see surrender by either side anytime soon.
I mean,
so the reality of it is, in order to make a peace deal,
look, if y'all let this keep going, I'm pretty sure we'll see a surrender by the end of the year. if we was to let it keep going.
Ukraine is going to have to accept things it doesn't like, and Russia is going to have to accept things it doesn't like. And
Excuse me?
and we need to be able to use the influence of the presidency to push both sides to make those concessions.
Did Putin bring up a potential nuclear deal with the United States as part of this?
No, the talks were almost exclusively, and I would say 99% were just about the war and about how to bring it to an end and the Russian perspective. And people should not underestimate the value of meeting in person. They've had multiple phone conversations, but meeting in person really allows you to get a better gauge of how strongly one side feels about certain issues. We've met with the Ukrainians dozens of times.